Tom Suozzi of New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you again. I especially appreciated your comment in the beginning about the manipulators of Moscow. I thought that was a very good way of putting it, and I want to thank the ranking member as well for some of his comments, especially if you mess with the bull, you get the horns. And I think that his Sanctions Act that he's proposed, along with one of our colleagues, is a great example of that. And I want to echo a lot of things that have been said on both sides here today about the need to actually do something in response to what the Russians have been doing. The world today is not as simple as America versus the Russia, or like it was against the Soviets. The challenge in the world today, as Tom Friedman wrote in his book, and I think Mr. Yuhu was, how do you say his name? Yoho? Was referencing is this, the battle is between control versus chaos. Places in the world that are stable versus chaos, places that are ungoverned, places that are failing, places that were propped up in the old days by the Soviets and the Americans that were average and below average states, but because of corruption or because of lack of resources or incompetence, they're failing. And we now have 65 million refugees in the world as opposed to 35 million refugees 10 years ago. And what Putin is doing and what the Russians are doing is they're fomenting chaos in the world. And that's the biggest threat to our world order today is chaos. Places that are ungoverned, places that cannot stay governed, and that are fomenting unrest and insecurity in so many different places. So I want to appreciate both ambassadors' comments about that they support the idea of an independent investigative body similar to a 9/11 commission. I think, Mr. Durand, are you supportive of that as well?
I'll leave that up to the committee.
Well, I certainly would support that, and I think many others would as well. What I want to ask each of you in the 3 minutes that I have left is, what is the one thing that you think that we can do now, even before we do further investigation? Because everybody agrees what the Russians did in this past election, the intelligence community, each of the witnesses here, all of us up here. We all know what the Russians have done and have continued to do. What is the one thing we can do now to send a very clear message to the Russians that we're not going to take this and we're going to act strongly? Just one thing from each of you.
Well, recognize the asymmetry of positive asymmetry in favor of the West and actually make it difficult for people to send their massive amounts of illicit money to be laundered in the West, to be parked in real estate in London and in Florida. And the same people, I mean, it's unconscionable, the same person who stopped Russian adoptions has a mansion in Florida. I mean,
right. So the financial money that's pouring into our country and in other countries that we think may have influenced elections as well, try and do what we can to try and stop people from having that freedom from Russia to spread their money around the world to influence people's behavior. Ambassador?
Recognize that what Russia tries to do works best if no one ever figures it out. They've been caught. We've caught them. And so flip the lights on, let the sunlight of transparency shine on all of his sins, punch it through their firewalls, and let 143 Russian people know everything about Vladimir Putin and what his circle has done.
So we've figured it out, and we've seen the intelligence community's reports on this, the unclassified ones. But you think that there's even more that we can figure out and tie more of these connections together if we were to do this type of investigation?
You have to ask yourself why the Russians, the Iranians, the Chinese spend so much time and effort, and they create commands to oversee the internet and television and create propaganda channels. They have a huge investment in the information space that's not public. It's not free. There's a reason for that.
We've got to fight them with the truth, as you have been saying all day here today, transparency. So I only have a minute left. So, Mr. Durand?
When it comes to disinformation and propaganda, a magic trick is only magic as long as you can't see the sleight of hand. Revealing Russia's sleight of hand on propaganda is the best way that we can push back against disinformation.
So you were leaving it up to the committee, but you're encouraging us to dig further. So further information, independent, find out what's going on, expose the trick that they're doing. Ambassador?
I mean, I agree with some of the statements that have been made so far. I think we need to keep the punishments that we've already put in place and be assessing whether additional punishments are necessary, and that can be part of the work of this committee or a recommendation of an independent commission. And I think we should be sitting down with our European colleagues, both in government and in civil society, and thinking practically about next steps to help them build their resilience of their society.
I would argue that more punishment is necessary, and we need to do more, but at the same time recognizing what some of my colleagues, we don't want a war. We don't want to destroy Russia because, you know, we don't want more chaos. We want them to be stable. But they've got to know they can't mess with us like this. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.